Welcome to the Devin Nunes podcast, breaking through the political noise, separating fact from fiction. From the San Joaquin Valley, the breadbasket of the solar system. Here is your host, Devin Nunes.
Welcome back to the Devin Nunes podcast. I'm pleased to have on the former chairman, top Republican on the Ways and Means Committee. Everyone hears a lot about what plans do the Republicans have. And those of you who listen to my podcast know that we dive deep into issues. What I want to do with Chairman Brady is I want to talk about first the economy and taxes, and that's what we're going to do in this episode. And then next week we'll have another episode where we will talk about the healthcare challenges, why Obamacare is a problem, and how we can make those changes. So I appreciate everyone for listening. As everyone knows, this is a place where you can come to and get information and share the information. And I'm so thankful for all of you that listen. And please continue to send me ideas. But with that, we have Kevin Brady, my friend. I've served with him my entire time. We actually used to sit by each other. I was on the trade committee with him, the healthcare committee with him. He comes from Texas, the great state of Texas, from the Houston area. Originally, though, kind of a collegiate baseball player, born in South Dakota, worked for the Chamber of Commerce before you came to Congress. And so, Kevin, your background really is small business. And I know you have that in mind every day you go to work is, how are we going to create small businesses so that we can incubate and create jobs for the American people? But thank you so much for taking the time, for coming on and sharing with our audience your decades of great experience.
Well, Devin, thanks for having me. I know the rest of the world knows your work in national security and intelligence, so important to the country, but I know your work on the Ways and Means Committee, your leadership on tax reform and jumpstarting this economy, your leadership of healthcare and all these key issues. So, no, thanks very much for having me on.
So Kevin, we're out there every day. Obviously, the presidential gets all of the oxygen, but everybody always says, well, what are you guys going to do? What are you guys going to do? Well, people have to remember that, I have to use a podcast in order to reach people because the mainstream media is going to totally ignore the plans that we've been building for many years. And what I first want to dive into is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was a product that we worked on for over 10 years. So back in the mid 2000s, I think you actually sat on that tax commission where we looked at all the different concepts. And one of the things that we came up with is that the current tax code was regressive. It punished people if you wanted to go buy. I always use the forklift example for those of you who listen to my podcast a lot. Well, why should the government decide whether or not you should go buy a new forklift or not, and how how many years you would take to depreciate that? If you want to buy a new forklift or 5 forklifts, you should be able to go and do it. So that was one of the things that we talked about, is that when a business, whether it be small or large, wants to make an investment, they should be able to write that off immediately. And I think that's really what's led to the booming economy until this pandemic hit. But we got the tax code out of the way. So can you talk about that achievement that we've made, why it's so important, and what we need to do next?
Yeah, so first, remember the moments that we were in back then. Look, the economy had been, slow growth, less than 2% for 8 years. Paychecks have been flat for a decade. Jobs in companies were moving overseas, and our young people coming out of school, their job opportunities were pretty iffy. We knew we could do better, and had worked so many years, as you said, to be prepared for a president willing to lead on tax reform. Well, we got that, and we dove into it. And a lot of your listeners don't know, but many of the most pro-growth business provisions of the tax code came from your tax reform bill. And our view was, let's create a tax code built for growth. It would build the economy, build jobs, build paychecks in a major way. And that's exactly what we did. As you know, our economy accelerated dramatically, millions of new jobs created, paychecks, fastest growth in more than a decade. And what I know you and I appreciate if we let people keep more of what they earn, whether they're a family, a single mom, or a small business, the economy improves, their prospects improve, and we create more jobs as we do that. The other thing I'm pretty proud of, while we leapfrog back to the world's strongest economy, we lifted 2.5 million people out of poverty. in just about 2 years. Paychecks for blue-collar workers and low-income workers were growing faster than their supervisors, and women of color were winning the jobs race for the first time in anyone's memory. And so we are lifting America's economy from the workers, not from the top down. And I think that's been key. And thank goodness we had that strong economy heading into this coronavirus. I don't know how we would have survived without it.
That's a great point. And so I want to break this into two different areas, Chairman. First of all, I want to talk about you mentioned it, and it's critically important. Before we did this, we saw an exodus of jobs, major corporations that continue to be located overseas. Now, why is that so important? You pointed out the pandemic, because the left, they always want to say, oh, the Republicans want to give tax cuts to big corporations. Well, the fact of the matter is that big corporations were leaving this country, had been leaving for a decade, and putting their taxes over, or putting their headquarters overseas, so they weren't paying any tax in the United States anyway. And then also what was happening is intellectual property then was going to other countries at the same time. So this would be new innovations, especially in the medical arena. And that's why this is, all these things are ultimately interrelated. We wonder why so many of our important drugs and pharmaceuticals and technology are made in China and made in these other countries. Well, it's because the tax code was so messed up that companies didn't want to be here. And I can remember, every year, it would be so sad. These California companies that had started in California. Now, look, California is a whole nother issue. We talk about it a lot on this show. You are the benefactor in Texas there, Kevin, because a lot of our companies have moved, and small businesses are moving to Texas and any other state really, but California and New York. But I was, every week, being a Californian and being on the Ways and Means Committee, we had companies coming in, longtime California companies, said, look, if you guys don't do something, we're moving our business. We're moving our corporate headquarters, not to Texas, we're moving them to Ireland. So you had this huge corporate tax shelters set up overseas because of the tax cuts. And that's why I laugh. The Democrats on the left say, we're going to roll back those taxes and put them. Well, then what you're going to do is you're going to do the same thing that happened for the last 2 decades. We're going to send all the jobs and all the corporate headquarters overseas, and we're going to get zero tax and zero jobs. Now we're getting both. We're getting the jobs and the taxes. And every time, if you're a big corporation, every person that you pay is going to pay income tax. And that growth has been amazing. And look, you have not heard, at least I haven't, maybe you have an example. I haven't heard of any major corporation leaving the United States since we passed that bill 3 years ago.
No, they haven't. In fact, the only one that moved had already started. It was almost complete. So no, that's in it. And remember, every month, Devin, you would open the paper, go online, and read about another U.S. company. And we lost 16 from Texas that moved their jobs in their headquarters overseas. And as you said, California, such a leader in innovation, was moving all your research, your patents, and then your advanced manufacturing over. That's what the old tax code said, invest somewhere else. Well, we changed that. We decided we'd have a tax code that was one of the most competitive in the world, that said to businesses, invest here in America. We'll make sure you can compete anywhere in the world and win, including here in the U.S. And that's exactly what's happened. We saw $1 trillion of investment. There was a giant sucking sound into America, of new investments and jobs. And we've continued to see that. So as you said, Ireland, Europe, China can hardly wait for Democrats to reverse the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because they've been scrambling to try to keep up with us since we did it.
Yeah, and really it was a matter of, we had the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And where we went to really was just below the average. Corporations still are paying taxes. But the other thing that we did that I think people didn't expect, and this is why it relates to small business, is we did full expensing on anything that you buy. And pretty much it's across the board for all businesses. And that's another advantage, that no matter what size business you have, you can make these investments. So you can, instead of taking in income and then having to pay half of that or a third of that to the government, if you decide, wait a second, I'm going to go over to our local forklift location, and I'm going to buy 3 forklifts this year because I can expand and build another business, a manufacturing plant over here. Well, what that does is, we don't get that initial tax up front. And I'm talking for any size business here. And I think it's important for people to understand. And this is really a benefit for the small business. And, we have seen that, even here in California, despite all the rules and regulations, and I'm sure you're really seeing it in Texas, is that this has been a small business boom for that small business owner and that entrepreneur, somebody who wants to start in business, because of this provision where we're not punishing you to go buy those 3 forklifts any longer.
Yeah, and it did exactly that. I think that was, I see that as one of the most pro-growth parts of our tax reform. That was your legislation, because you knew if we allowed businesses of all size to immediately buy and write that off from their taxes, we'd see them invest more in their workers, in technology, in new plants. And that's exactly what we've seen, Devin. My district starts outside Houston, and then it has about 8 rural counties. And I toured 3 new manufacturing plants, about 50 to 80 workers, not huge, but really important in some of the poorest counties in my district. And as I toured those new plants, they said, Congressman, look around at all this equipment, the millions of dollars we bought. We opened this up because your tax code said now we could do that. And again, Joe Biden 8 times has said, I'm going to repeal the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, just out of spite, I think, to the president. But boy, that's going to hurt working families, small business. They're going to take away that 20% small business deduction. They're going to actually punish U.S. businesses for building and buying and investing in that technology. I can't think of a worse time coming out of a pandemic to do that than right now. So crucially important we keep that growth together.
Yeah, and so, right, and if we repeal it, we go back to the same thing we had for the last 2 decades, which is you would see an exodus of corporations like you've never seen if they truly were going to do it. Now, look, I think the reality is they wouldn't be able to do it because it would be such a disaster. But this new socialist tendency that they have, where the socialist communist party in this country, which is essentially running the Democratic Party, they talk of tax rates, Kevin, of 60, 70, 80%. They talk about, well, if you make over this amount, we're gonna take this. We have people proposing in California that it doesn't matter if you're making money or not, but if you have over a certain amount of wealth, you're going to have to pay a tax on that wealth, which is part of the reason why you continue to see people move to Texas. But just to kind of finish up here, how do you explain, when you talk about the small businesses that are really that incubator where people get their first jobs and people have a chance to get equity? When you go out and you're trying to, because you used to work for the Chamber of Commerce, and obviously as a congressman, you're still pitching to people, look, Texas is open for business. Let me explain to you, how you can make these investments and bring these businesses to my part of Texas. And how do you walk through that and tie in the changes that we made to the federal tax code?
Yeah, I think the key thing, Main Street, while it may look different, across communities across America, they're very similar in this. If you let a small business, and they work, as brutal hours, they work 7 days a week, they invest their money. It's incredible what our entrepreneurs do. You let them keep more of what they work so hard to earn at the end of each week. You let them, thanks to you, write off that new equipment, that new technology, those new computers immediately from their taxes. And then we created a new 20% small business tax deduction, on top of all that, to make sure that that you could keep more of what you earn and invest it back. And the other thing we did too, I think it's important in the long term, the death tax is the number one reason our small businesses, family farms aren't passed down to the next generation. Well, we changed that. We repealed it in the House, It didn't end up repealing, but we doubled the exemption. So we protected a whole lot of small family-owned businesses and growing women and minority-owned businesses from Uncle Sam swooping in and taking everything they've worked a lifetime to earn. All of those really, that's why small business optimism was at the highest in some cases in 20 or 30 years, because the code allowed them to do what they want to do, which is grow.
Well, and look, and I would say this just to finish here, is that you have to remember big corporations are great. We need them in this country. They make the world go around. But really, without that opportunity that you have at the lowest level, you can go work for a big corporation. Well, you're never going to own the corporation. You may get stock. You may have that sort of thing, added benefits that you have for working for a big corporation. But it's really at the entrepreneurial level. If you dream of ever owning your own business, the key is to get in with a startup, get it on the ground floor, learn a great skill, and then take the money that you're making and then be able to invest that. And that's where you have a real opportunity to do that, is getting in on the ground floor of a small business. And I know that's what a lot of Americans dream about, and that's what we did by passing this. And Chairman, you led us through all that, and I want to thank you for your leadership on all of it.
Well, Devin, thank you. And again, we've got more work to do. We think we can rebuild this greatest economy in history, become medically independent from China, grow again in innovation, but we're going to have to build off of our tax reform, do even more. And I know you and I are helping lead that effort. So thanks for all your work.
I know, because I may ultimately get my dream, because the one thing that we weren't able to do full expensing on was commercial real estate. And we had a pushback, ironically, from some of the big commercial real estate owners who wanted to stay on that old system. So everything inside of a building you can write off immediately, but the structure you cannot. And I just wonder now, the pushback we had on that, Kevin. I just wonder now, with the changes in Manhattan and these big cities with these huge commercial buildings with more people after this pandemic, I think we may have a few more takers now, people who understand why it's important that everything across the economy should be fully expensed, and we as the government shouldn't be picking winners and losers.
Yeah, Devin, especially now as we work to bring back manufacturing of crucial medicines, medical supplies, ingredients back to America. They are going to be investing billions of dollars in these new plants. Those buildings, structures, land, being able to write that off, I think that would draw and anchor all those important manufacturing things back here in the U.S. So you're exactly right. I think it's the time.
Well, Kevin, Brady, thank you so much for taking a very complicated issue like taxes and making our listeners able to understand it. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, sir. Take care, Devin.
This is Devin Nunes. We will have Kevin Brady back on next time to talk healthcare.
Thanks for listening to the Devin Nunes Podcast. We invite you to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And remember, you can download this podcast on iTunes or at devinnunes.com.
Storm clouds been gathering so long, I don't know.
The darkness around us leaves no easy road.
We started wondering if every road dead ends our dreams. Wind whips the dust up and rain's pouring down.
Good people struggling in every hometown.
We've started wondering if we even matter at all. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. Now it's not our first trial by fire like this.
It's nothing hard working family can fix.
We've got the power to save it all here in our hands. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. As we, the people, free and strong, fight With a prayer and a purpose, we're already half the way there. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we've kept our American faith. Ooh, we kept our American. We kept our American. Ooh, we kept our American. We kept our American faith. Freedom marches on.
Paid for by Devin Nunes Campaign Committee.